Hi, I'm Beth Comstock. I'm here with Walter Isaacson. Thanks for doing this. Your
Beth, it's great
book.
to be back with you.
Well, we're here at a conference called Minds and Machines, and I think a perfect setting to talk about Leonardo da Vinci.
Who loved minds and machines.
Exactly. He studied them all. So what we do with Changemakers Book Club is we talk about creativity, curiosity, innovation, how you embrace those things to make change happen and work for you at work. And in reading the book, I've got the book here, Walter Isaacson, Leonardo da Vinci. This is somebody who basically made curiosity a way of life.
You know, that is so smart because that's what made him the creative person he was.
Was he born that way?
No. He was born out of wedlock, which was lucky for him because he didn't get sent to one of the Latin schools or universities. Also, had he been legitimate born, he would have been a notary like his father and grandfather. And he wouldn't have been a very good notary because he wasn't, he thought out of the box and stuff. But it was partly because he had to teach himself and learn things that he became extraordinarily curious. And he was curious in that way we all are when we're kids. I
love that. So, and you're saying he kept that through his whole life. So.
Right. We outgrow it. We outgrow our wonder years and we quit asking, why is the sky blue? Or why do people yawn? People say, quit asking all those questions. Yeah. But throughout his life and his notebooks until his 60s, he's always writing down things he wanted to be curious about. Like, how would you measure the size of the sun? How do they walk on ice in Flanders? How would you make a certain type of machine that would divert a river? And sketches for the Mona Lisa. So we look at his notebooks and we see curiosity for its own sake.
Did you expect that when you started studying him? What did you think? Why did you pick
thought
him?
of him mainly as an artist who had done some engineering, and I flipped the script as soon as I started reading his notebooks because he made no distinction between art and engineering. He thought that everything was a reflection of nature's beauty. And so what I really learned was that engineering was his real passion. And that helped him draw, it helped him do his anatomy and science.
How do you think he defined engineering?
He defined engineering mainly in a mechanical way. He did all sorts of machines that would even try to do a perpetual motion machine. Famously, he did a flying machine. But he really defined mechanical engineering as motion. And he loved the way motion worked, whether it was the flow of a river, which over and over again he obsesses with, and the Mona Lisa has that flow of the river into the body of the human, or whether it was the motion of our minds connecting to the motions of our body, or whether it was a type of motions that would make flying machines.
So you talk about him being illegitimate and therefore sort of out of the normal society of the time. He was a vegetarian,
yeah.
He was left-handed, he was gay, all things that in the time were not part of society. Do you think his outsider status empowered him in a way?
It empowered him to question authority. We're here in the Moscone Center doing this. I remember Steve Jobs upstairs introducing that ad, which was here's to the misfit, the rebels, the round pegs and the square holes. I think to be creative, sometimes you have to question even the obvious. The way Einstein questioned Newton's opening of the Principia, which says time marches along irrespective of how we observe it. Einstein said, how do we know it? Likewise, for Leonardo, there was a lot of received wisdom, but he said, not me, I'm a disciple of experience. I always test something.
So you talk a lot about him sort of being creative. He combines things to be creative in new ways.
That
it's always about the
combinatory
creativity, I think you call it.
Absolutely.
And you also talk about him being a collaborator, which I think I found surprising. Talk about the ability to collaborate with the kinds of creativity and then the people for creativity.
Right. We biographers have a dirty secret, which is that we make it sound like some gal or guy goes to a garage in Garrett or has an innovative moment.
This lone
but
genius.
Anybody in business, from General Electric to every person watching this show who's ever done business, knows it's all about building the right team. That's what Steve Jobs said. That's what anybody will tell you. We think of artists in particular as being loners. But Leonardo had a studio. He worked first for Verrocchio, where they're all helping with the painting. They're helping build the copper ball on the Florence Dome. And so throughout his life, Leonardo knew that creativity was a team sport. For example, I'm going to grab my book for a moment. This is Vitruvian Man, the most famous of all drawings. I have a chapter on it in the book about how he and three friends, architects and artists, were trying to figure out church design reading Vitruvius's ancient work, the proportions of a human, making a circle in a square, all of these things, and they do it together. There's in fact one dinner that I found in the notebooks in July 1492, where all of them are doing sketches of how does man fit into the world, the universe, and the spirit of a church. So even his most famous drawing is done collaboratively.
Yeah, so it's a big insight, I think.
And by the way, it's an insight that everybody watching the show already knows, meaning they all know you got to collaborate, but sometimes we don't think about it. We think that innovation is a loner sport.
So he was, he had many interests. I mean, I was thinking as I read the book, you might call him a dilettante in today's world.
We'd call him a Renaissance man.
A Renaissance man, but when you think about it in business, people are often criticized for dabbling, for experimenting, and yet this was a way of life for him. I mean, would he make it today?
It's a mistake, I think. And you can look at all the fields General Electric is in and how they reinforce the other fields, that people who too much silo themselves, who get too compartmentalized and don't see the patterns across various businesses or the patterns across nature, are going to be less creative.
Yeah.
So one of the lessons from Leonardo is be interested in everything. Try to look at all fields.
Innovation really is in those intersections, and he stands for that. You talked earlier, you mentioned Mona Lisa, and I love the story about he took it everywhere he went for like 14 years.
Oh, no, he was not very good. This is not a great lesson, but he was not good at finishing some of his commissions. And so with the Mona Lisa, he starts it in 1503. He's done anatomy drawings of the facial muscles and nerves. He's done optics experiments with the eye, showing how if you look directly at something, you see detail, but if you're sort of looking at it from an angle, you see colors and shadows. So from 1503 until his death, he carries it around from Florence to Milan to Rome and then over the Alps to Paris. And every now and then in life, you usually have to do the maxim of, real artists ship, meaning you got to get things out the door. But every now and then in life, you sort of say, let me try to make it perfect. And that's what he did with the Mona Lisa.
So he was somewhat of a perfectionist.
Definitely, which is why some of his paintings are unfinished.
Yeah, I want to quote one of the things you wrote. You said, what made Leonardo a genius, what set him apart from people who are merely extraordinarily smart, was creativity, the ability to apply imagination to intellect, make unexpected leaps that revealed things leaps that revealed things seen to things unseen. So that creativity, that leap of imagination, was he comfortable with that?
Yeah, he starts his life and career as a theater and spectacle producer for the Medicis, meaning all the pageants and plays they put on.
So he was an imaginative person.
And so that helicopter that he famously invents, something up in your field, it was started as a prop for the theater to bring angels down from the rafters. But what he does is he blurs the line between his wonderful fantasies and reality. So he says, in real life, how would I build a flying machine?
And he did. He attempted to do that.
Yeah.
So he
never was able to do a human-powered flying machine.
But he could see it.
Even General Electric has not been able to do that.
Yeah.
But he envisioned what it would be like.
Yeah, I love the fact that he saw things and then he tried to bring them to life.
That's imagination.
So you end the book with some applications that you learned. So I want to go through a couple of those things. For example, you talk about observing. So give us what can we learn from the way Leonardo observed? You said observe. What did he do?
I'll give you one example. He loved the flow of fluids and water. Little kid, he's looking at the eddies when you put obstacles in the little streams that go to the Arno near Florence. All throughout his life, start with the earliest picture he works on, Baptism of Christ. You see the eddies being scientifically right as the water of the Jordan goes past the ankles of Jesus. All the way to the end with the Mona Lisa, you see the flow of water. But you also see it when he and Machiavelli try to divert the Arno River to give Florence an outlet to the sea, and when he dissects the human heart, which he discovers that the heart valve opens and shuts, not because of the pressure of the blood going from the heart to the ventricle, but because it swirls when it goes up that way and thus brings the membrane out. So that ability to see a pattern of how water swirls is a pattern he saw across nature, and it's something that we can all learn from. This morning, I said, okay, every day I'm going to be more like Leonardo. I'm there in the morning, the water is going into the sink. I pause for a moment and say, why does it swirl the way it does? We're in San Francisco. I was walking here past the bay. I see the ripples of water, but they're not going with the wind. They're a little bit of it. And so I pause for a moment and look at the ripples and try to figure out why do ripples form on water.
I love that you've pulled that into your daily life.
Every day in every one of our things, we can pause for just 10 seconds and say, as he did, why is the sky blue? Why does water swirl?
In praise of asking questions, too. It's
yeah,
all
let's
about
not
questions.
outgrow our wonder years. Let's be curious.
I love that. Don't outgrow your wonder years. You talk about the wallow in details. That's another recommendation you have. How did he do that?
When he was observing things, he sometimes realized you couldn't observe something whole. Like you can't look at a whole page of a book and absorb it. You have to go word by word by word. So he says, when you observe, start with the details. Like if he's looking at water flowing into a pond, he would start with the bubbles and ask, how do the bubbles move and rise? He said, once you've understood one of the details, go to the next detail, and then you'll see the whole.
In our attention deficit world, that's a real challenge.
Right.
You wonder how he would have done today.
He was distracted. He lived in a world just like ours, where Gutenberg had just invented the press, which is a little bit like the invention of the internet, in that it allowed him to geek out and drill down on anything he wanted to learn. And he sometimes got too distracted and went down rabbit holes that were a waste of time. But I actually think that's not the worst thing in the world.
And in fact, you recommend go down some rabbit holes. What does that mean to you and
Well,
Leonardo?
for example, Leonardo, there's an ancient mathematical problem called squaring the circle. We think of it as a cliche, but the ancients realized that there was a challenge of taking a square of a certain area and transforming it into a circle of the exact same area. Now, and doing it with only a protractor and a ruler. Now that's extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, because pi is an irrational number. But as you try to do it, you see the transformation of shapes. There must be 500 drawings in Leonardo's notebook of him trying to square the circle. It helps him when he does Vitruvian Man. And his last notebook page, as he's dying, there's 4 more attempts.
As he's dying?
I have in the book, the last notebook page. There's, 4 right triangles, where Euclid was doing to do it. And then, as he's describing it, he finally says, but the soup is getting cold. We can imagine him up there in his study doing this, and his cook downstairs saying, okay, everybody's at the table, come on down, the soup is getting cold. And I love the fact that he really, really sort of tried hard and obsessed over something.
It's a great story. You also talk about how he made lists, thousands of pages of notebooks, and you end your book in a really special way. Can you share it with us?
You mean on paper?
The woodpecker.
Oh, the woodpecker. I'll look at his lists. Every week he says, I want to know, how do they walk on ice in Flanders? How do they make a lock that opens the canals in Milan? How would you ask our friend so-and-so how to do the measurement of the sun? And then he writes, describe the tongue of the woodpecker. I laugh. I go, all right, this guy's gone too far in his curiosity. Why would you wake up one morning and not want to know the tongue of a woodpecker looks like? How would you find out? Find a woodpecker? And so I kind of laugh and then go on, and then I keep noticing he cares about it. And so near the end, even though I make fun of him in the introduction for having that on one of his lists, at the end I say, wait a minute, let me be a little bit more like Leonardo. I should be interested in that. So I look at some scientific studies, and I realize the tongue of the woodpecker is 3 times longer than the beak. It wraps around the brain. It protects it. There is no reason you need to know that. Yeah. There's no reason anybody needs to know it. But if you want to be a little bit more like Leonardo, you might want to know it just out of curiosity.
So instead of making
pure curiosity,
instead of making your list to pick up the laundry on your way home, ask questions like, "What's up with the tongue of a woodpecker?"
Exactly. I mean, if you can be curious about everything, you will sort of sense the beauty of everything in nature. I mean, the tongue of a woodpecker is the only muscle that pushes rather than pulls. It helps him with his lips, because when he's doing the lips of the Mona Lisa, the bottom lip is a muscle. But I think he wanted to know, not because it was useful, it was because he was Leonardo.
So you've written about some of the famous inventors and most creative people in history. That's a really interesting thread. Did you set out to do that?
No.
I mean, Ben Franklin, Steve Jobs,
Leonardo
Einstein.
was great at spotting patterns. Me, it took me a little longer to spot the pattern. I did Ben Franklin because I was trying to understand realism in American diplomacy after doing Henry Kissinger. I realized he was a great scientist, so then I did Einstein. But by the time I got to Steve Jobs, who in this building would show the intersection of the arts and technology
So
when he
well,
launched a product, I said, I get it. There's a pattern here. The pattern is not smart people, it's creative people. And what does it take to be creative? Looking across all the disciplines of arts and sciences.
How do you write your books? I mean, you're a great synthesizer. Talk about your process to put all this together. I mean, the books are incredibly well researched, well written. It's kind of
for us,
quite
it's the
an
labor
effort.
of love.
Yeah.
In fact, the love of love. And, for this one, I started with the 7,000 pages of notebooks you talked about. Going day by day, looking at them draw rivers, draw scenes of the Last Supper, dissect a human phase, cramming it all on pages. And then my books are pretty simple. Unlike other books, say, on Leonardo or Einstein, mine are narrative biography. It means it begins when they're born, it ends when they die, and everything happens chronologically. Why? Because I actually think people learn, and that what they do in 1 year is based on what they had done the year before. So it's a very simple structure. I put all my notes in chronological order, and then I do something that an uncle of mine once said is just always be a storyteller. Whenever you're writing something, have in your mind the 6 words, let me tell you a story.
So, and you're a great storyteller.
That's
Two
very
more
nice.
questions as we wrap up. So you've been in business, you've worked in business, you've led big organizations. Draw the thread from Franklin to Einstein to Leonardo to Jobs. I mean, what do you think we can take away from them for business?
Well, Ben Franklin was somebody who was the best businessman of his era. Started as almost penniless runaway, as you know from the autobiography, 3 coins in his pocket when he lands in Philadelphia as a bedraggled runaway, and he opens a print shop. And then with the print shop, he realizes he needs content, and he says, well, Bibles, people only buy them once in a lifetime. I'll do an almanac, Poor Richard's Almanac. They buy, and then he franchises his print shops up and down the coast. Then he creates the postal system so he can control the distribution. He sort of saw the way to build an organization based on sort of the synergistic ways that different divisions could work together. Same with Steve Jobs. He would never use the word division.
So Walter, you've covered these great inventors, these creative souls, from Franklin to Jobs to Da Vinci to Einstein. You've been a business leader, you've led organizations. How do you connect the creative soul to business? What can we learn?
Well, I look at Benjamin Franklin, who realized that once he had a print shop, he was just a runaway with just a few pennies in his pocket. He makes a print shop, and then he has the content, then he has the postal service as a distribution system. He sees a whole ecosystem that will create an industry. Secondly, all of them were great team builders. Ben Franklin franchises print shops up and down the coast, and he was also the glue that held together all of the founders, the passionate people like Sam Adams and the high rectitude people like George Washington. He was the glue that held them together. And that reminds me also of Steve Jobs, who when I said, what's the greatest product you ever made? He said, not the iPod or the Mac or whatever. He said, the team that built those, because building the team was the tough part. And then with Leonardo, you even see him as somebody who sees how everything is connected. He's a great leader because he's inspiring, but he also tries hard to be collaborative and creative in his teamwork.
Some great points there about vision, leadership, teamwork. Last question, in terms of the Renaissance period, Leonardo and today, anything we can learn from the Renaissance that might help us think
we are in 1470 in Florence. You have a confluence of things that are happening. Everything from the printing press being invented to people like Columbus being born, but also things like bookkeeping that allows debits and credits, allowing the Medici to become venture capitalists, but also a tolerance there in which a illegitimate left-handed, gay, heretical 12-year-old could wander into town and be accepted. And it reminds me 500 years later of where we are today. San Francisco, where you had, free speech movements and people dropping acid, but also engineers and people making microchips, and the homebrew computer club. If you're tolerant to all that messy diversity, you're going to be more creative. Why does GE move to Boston? Because it's a town filled with creative people. So to me, the geography of creativity is important too, whether it's creating creative spaces within your businesses and headquarters or being among creative people where you work.
So congratulations, Leonardo da Vinci. So you've announced Leonardo DiCaprio is going to play Leonardo da Vinci in the movie.
Leonardo DiCaprio's company bought the rights to the book, and I'm thrilled because DiCaprio cares about nature a lot. He's an environmentalist. He sees the patterns of nature. He's a great performance artist, which, as I said, Leonardo loved theater, and he loved art, Leonardo DiCaprio. So he's one person I think would truly get the totality of Leonardo da Vinci.
Well, he's a cool guy, Leonardo da Vinci. So
I
thanks
think
for
so,
sharing
too.
the story. Thanks a lot,
Thanks a
Walter.
lot.
Good
Good
catching
to
up with
see
you.
you.
Thanks.